very warm good afternoon to you. My name is Mbitha Mwema and I want to welcome you to Markets Today this afternoon. It's midweek and there's been a lot happening on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, at least by virtue of turnover. I will be starting us off by giving you an overview of what was happening. Certainly Safaricom was dominating trades yesterday. Then I'll give you an outlook in terms of what is happening on corporate news. When we take a break and come back, we will be discussing tech trends here on Markets Today. Each and every single Wednesday, we try and reach out to as many people as we can and listen to the voice of women in technology, whether they're championing that space by contributing by way of business or contributing by way of being employed in that space. That's a conversation we want to have today. Later on, I will introduce our guest, but we will be talking about technology trends, at least for the next year. What are your views when it comes to technology trends? But for this particular week and for the next coming week, we also want to hear from you. What are the investment trends that you are looking out for? We had a conversation yesterday. We are continuing with this conversation. We want to hear what are the kind of topics you would like to hear from us to be able to make that decision. Now let's take a look at what was happening on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. We'll start off with the indices and see how this performed yesterday. The indices were all up in the green yesterday, all the indices trending upwards, largely pushed by a bit of an improvement on the blue chip companies. Well, the NSE All Share was up 38 basis points to close the day at 167.45, whereas the NSE 20 was up 6.57 percentage points to close the day at 1,888.71 points. NSE 25 share index up 5.63 points to close the day at 3,461.61. Let's take a look at what was happening on turnover, which was actually up 66 percentage points to close the day at 192 million compared to the previous day's session. Safaricom was dominating the trades over the day, and let's take a look at what was happening on the blue chip companies. We had Safaricom, we had Equity, we also had East African Breweries topping the charts by virtue of turnover. As you can see there on your screen, Safaricom was topping charts, trading at an average price of 36.55 shillings for 2 million shares over the day for a cumulative turnover of 76 million shillings. Equity Group was up, was trading range bound at 36.75 shillings per share. Turnover was cumulative 54 million for this particular share. East African Breweries is still holding steady at 148 shillings per share, but before East African Breweries, we did have I&M Holdings with a surprise trade that came in through yesterday, putting it at the third in ranking by virtue of turnover. This share is still trading at 46.5. I think it had hit a low 43.42 shillings earlier in the year. We have been looking for liquidity events and trying to see if there's demand that's chasing this, because the valuation on this stock still remains attractive, and we are beginning to see a bit of interest coming in from investors. British American Tobacco ranked 5th yesterday by virtue of turnover, with 14,000 shares traded at an average price of 400.25 shillings per share for a cumulative turnover of 5.643. Let's take a look at the other parameters and see who are the movers by virtue of volume. As expected, Safaricom 2.08 million shares, followed by Equity, and you can see there again the same line charts. I&M, KenGen also traded a bit, 328,000 shares traded. Kenya Re as well, 253.6 thousand shares traded. Let's take a look at who the price movers were and who was weak over the day. But even as we are looking at this, just by virtue of the turnover yesterday, we did see that the foreign investors continued to be net buyers, accounting for 68% of all the activity on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. By virtue of that, the price movements were relegated to the small caps, with TransCentury, Nairobi Business Ventures, Williamson Tea, Home Africa leading the pack. The small caps gained TransCentury up 7.46 percentage points, and you have a price of 1.44. Let's take a look at what was happening on the losers over the day. The losers, again, the small caps dominating there. Nothing surprising there. I think Kenya Power down 3 percentage points to 1.6. TPS Arena rather down 4.8 percentage points. We also saw some bit of weakness on East African Cables, Sanlam, as well as Standard Group. So not much movement happening on the blue chips with regards to price. Foreign investors continue to remain net buyers on the NSE. This trend of foreign investors remaining net buyers has actually been ongoing from the month of November through into December and now also in January. What has happened is that in November, there was a reshuffling in terms of an upgrade of Kenya in some of the global indices, including the Morgan Stanley. This saw a lot of demand, pent-up demand, being allocated into Kenyan equities, with new investors who are not previously looking at Kenya now beginning to look at Kenya. The other thing we've also had this week is that because of last year and the incidence of COVID-19, cash is king was the key thing that everybody was focusing on, holding on to short-term investments. But this year, the investment sentiment is sort of changing, albeit slowly, with people beginning to be open to hearing more about investment opportunities and being open to risky assets, such as equities. There could be an opportunity for you to pick long-term assets within the horizon of 5 to 10 years, or even a median of 7 years, give or take. What opportunities these are, we continue to disclose them. We already talked about fixed interest assets yesterday. We will be talking about equities tomorrow. I hope you can join us. But before we even get further into the discourse of looking at these opportunities, it's important to be cognizant of the risks that surround these opportunities. The greatest risk we have today in Kenya is debt. And by virtue of what was happening in the local dailies, we did see one of the local dailies come up with a story relegating the amount of money that has been paid by the government in as far as debt is concerned. The government of Kenya runs a calendar year from July 1st up until June 30th. For the first half of the year, which was July last year 2020 up until December 2020, the government paid out 60% of the revenues that it earned via tax for debt obligations. The current debt obligation payments for this fiscal year are trending slightly below 1 trillion shillings. That's a huge burden. Yet infrastructure continues to happen in this country and there's a lot still happening. So the question is, do you keep putting money here? Is this a risk concern? If you are looking at the long-term investment opportunities, you really want to pay attention to how the government is thinking about debt. But today, for you, there is an opportunity to invest by lending to the government because there is a huge appetite for domestic borrowing. And on the flip side, because of the affiliations and associations of debt relief, the government of Kenya is actually bound and it's unable to, at least over the next 6 months, borrow from the external markets. What this means? Local interest rates will continue trending upwards, so you have a 6-month window at least to be able to lock in some attractive interest rates for the long term. I hope you can consider that, and if you'd like more information, let us know what else you would like to know. Now, let's take a break. When we come back, on Markets Today, it's all about women in technology. We will be talking about the trends in technology, what's happening, what should you consider and think about when we come back, and I will introduce our guest in studio. See you after the break.